Major General Charles George Gordon, C.B., also known as Chinese Gordon, Gordon Pasha, and Gordon of Khartoum, was a British Army officer and administrator. He saw action in the Crimean War as an officer in the British Army. For this service he was appointed a Chevalier of the Legion of Honor by the government of France on 16 July 1856. But he made his military reputation in China, where he was placed in command of the ever-victorious army, a force of Chinese soldiers led by European officers. In the early 1860s, Gordon and his men were instrumental in putting down the Taiping Rebellion, regularly defeating much larger forces. For these accomplishments, he was given the nickname Chinese Gordon and honors from both the Emperor of China and the British. He entered the service of the Khedive in 1873 and later became the Governor-General of the Sudan, where he did much to suppress revolts and the slave trade. Exhausted, he resigned and returned to Europe in 1880. A serious revolt then broke out in the Sudan, led by a Muslim religious leader and self-proclaimed Mahdi, Muhammad Ahmad. Gordon had been sent to Khartoum with instructions to secure the evacuation of loyal soldiers and civilians and to depart with them. However, after evacuating about 2,500 British civilians, in defiance of those instructions, he retained a smaller group of soldiers and non-military men. In the build-up to battle, the two leaders corresponded, each attempting to convert the other to his faith, but neither would accede. Besieged by the Mahdi's forces, Gordon organized a city-wide defense lasting almost a year that gained him the admiration of the British public, but not of the government, which had wished him not to become entrenched. Only when public pressure to act had become irresistible did the government, with reluctance, send a relief force. It arrived 2 days after the city had fallen and Gordon had been killed. Early life. Gordon was born in Woolwich, London, a son of Major General Henry William Gordon and Elizabeth Gordon. He was educated at Fullan's School in Taunton, Somerset, Taunton School, and the Royal Military Academy, Woolwich. In 1852, he was commissioned a second lieutenant in the Royal Engineers, completing his training at Chatham, and in 1854 he was promoted to full lieutenant. Gordon was first assigned to construct fortifications at Milford Haven, Pembrokeshire, Wales. When the Crimean War began, he was sent to the Russian Empire, arriving at Balaclava in January 1855. He was put to work in the siege of Sevastopol and took part in the assault of the Redon from the 18th of June to the 8th of September. Gordon took part in the expedition to Keenburn, and returned to Sevastopol at the war's end. For his services in the Crimea, he received the Crimean War Medal and clasp. Following the peace, he was attached to an international commission to mark the new border between the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire in Bessarabia. He continued surveying, marking off the boundary into Asia Minor. Gordon returned to Britain in late 1858, and was appointed as an instructor at Chatham. He was promoted to captain in April 1859. China. In 1860 General Gordon volunteered to serve in China. He arrived at Tianjin in September 1859. He was present at the occupation of Beijing and at the destruction of the Summer Palace. The British forces occupied northern China until April 1862, then under General Charles William Dunbar Staveley, withdrew to Shanghai to protect the European settlement from the rebel Taiping Army. Following the successes in the 1850s in the provinces of Guangxi, Hunan and Hubei, and the capture of Nanjing in 1853, the rebel advance had slowed. For some years, the Taipings gradually advanced eastwards, but eventually they came close enough to Shanghai to alarm the European inhabitants. A militia of Europeans and Asians was raised for the defense of the city and placed under the command of an American, Frederick Townsend Ward, and occupied the country to the west of Shanghai. The British arrived at a crucial time. Staveley decided to clear the rebels within 30 miles of Shanghai in cooperation with Ward and a small French force. Gordon was attached to his staff as engineer officer. Jiading, northwest suburb of present Shanghai, Qingpu and other towns were occupied, and the area was fairly cleared of rebels by the end of 1862. Ward was killed in the Battle of Cixi and his successor H.A. Burgoyne, an American, was disliked by the Imperial Chinese authorities. Li Hongzhang, the governor of the Jiangsu province, requested Stavely to appoint a British officer to command the contingent. Stavely selected Gordon, who had been made a brevet major in December 1862, and the nomination was approved by the British government. In March 1863, Gordon took command of the force at Songjiang, which had received the name of Ever Victorious Army. Without waiting to reorganize his troops, Gordon led them at once to the relief of Chansu, a town 40 miles northwest of Shanghai. The relief was successfully accomplished and Gordon quickly won the respect of his troops. His task was made easier by innovative military ideas Ward had implemented in the Ever Victorious Army. Gordon then reorganized his force and advanced against Kunshan, which was captured at considerable loss. Gordon then took his force through the country, seizing towns until, with the aid of imperial troops, the city of Suzhou was captured in November. Following a dispute with Li Hongzhang over the execution of rebel leaders, Gordon withdrew his force from Suzhou and remained inactive at Kunshan until February 1864. Gordon then made a rapprochement with Li and visited him in order to arrange for further operations. The Ever Victorious Army resumed its high-tempo advance, leading to the Battle of Changzhou, and culminating in the capture of Changzhou-Fu, the principal military base of the Taipings in the region. Gordon then returned to Kunshan and disbanded his army. The emperor promoted Gordon to the rank of Tiju, decorated him with the imperial yellow jacket, and raised him to Qing's Viscount First Class. The British Army promoted Gordon to lieutenant colonel and he was made a companion of the Order of the Bath. He also gained the popular nickname, Chinese Gordon. Service with the Khedive. Gordon returned to Britain and commanded the Royal Engineers' efforts around Gravesend, Kent to erect forts for the defence of the River Thames. Following the death of his father, he undertook extensive social work in the town, including teaching at the local ragged school, and donated the gardens of his official residence, Fort House, to the town. In October 1871, he was appointed British representative on the International Commission to maintain the navigation of the mouth of the River Danube, with headquarters at Galatz. In 1872, Gordon was sent to inspect the British military cemeteries in the Crimea, and when passing through Constantinople he made the acquaintance of the Prime Minister of Egypt, who opened negotiations for Gordon to serve under the Khedive, Ismail Pasha. In 1873, Gordon received a definite offer from the Khedive, which he accepted with the consent of the British government, and proceeded to Egypt early in 1874. Gordon was made a colonel in the Egyptian army. The Egyptian authorities had been extending their control southward since the 1820s. An expedition was sent up the White Nile, under Sir Samuel Baker, which reached Khartoum in February 1870 and Gondokoro in June 1871. Baker met with great difficulties and managed little beyond establishing a few posts along the Nile. The Khedive asked for Gordon to succeed Baker as governor of the region. After a short stay in Cairo, Gordon proceeded to Khartoum via Suakin and Berber. From Khartoum, he proceeded up the White Nile to Gondokoro. Gordon remained in the Gondokoro provinces until October 1876. He had succeeded in establishing a line of way stations from the Sabat confluence on the White Nile to the frontier of Uganda, where he proposed to open a route from Mombasa. In 1874 he built the station at Dafile on the Albert Nile to reassemble steamers carried there past rapids for the exploration of Lake Albert. Moreover, considerable progress was made in the suppression of the slave trade. However, Gordon had come into conflict with the Egyptian governor of Khartoum and Sudan. The clash led to Gordon informing the Khedive that he did not wish to return to the Sudan, and he left for London. Ismail Pasha wrote to him saying that he had promised to return, and that he expected him to keep his word. Gordon agreed to return to Cairo, and was asked to take the position of Governor-General of the entire Sudan, which he accepted. He thereafter received the honorific rank and title of a Pasha in the local aristocracy, Governor-General of the Sudan. As governor, Gordon faced a variety of challenges. During the 1870s, European initiatives against the slave trade caused an economic crisis in northern Sudan, precipitating increasing unrest. Relations between Egypt and Abyssinia had become strained due to a dispute over the district of Bogos, and war broke out in 1875. An Egyptian expedition was completely defeated near Gungut. A second and larger expedition under Prince Hassan was sent the following year and was routed at Gura. Matters then remained quiet until March 1877, when Gordon proceeded to Massawa, hoping to make peace with the Abyssinians. He went up to Bogos and wrote to the king proposing terms. However, he received no reply as the king had gone southwards to fight with the Show. Gordon, seeing that the Abyssinian difficulty could wait, proceeded to Khartoum. An insurrection had broken out in Darfur and Gordon went to deal with it. The insurgents were numerous, and he saw that diplomacy had a better chance of success. Gordon, accompanied only by an interpreter, rode into the enemy camp to discuss the situation. This bold move proved successful, as many of the insurgents joined him, though the remainder retreated to the south. Gordon visited the provinces of Berber and Dongola, and then returned to the Abyssinian frontier, before ending up back in Khartoum in January 1878. Gordon was summoned to Cairo, and arrived in March to be appointed president of a commission. The Khedive was deposed in 1879 in favor of his son. Gordon returned south and proceeded to Hara, south of Abyssinia, and, finding the administration in poor standing, dismissed the governor. He then returned to Khartoum, and went again into Darfur to suppress the slave traders. His subordinate, Jesse Pasha, fought with great success in the Bahr el Ghazal district in putting an end to the revolt there. Gordon then tried another peace mission to Abyssinia. The matter ended with Gordon's imprisonment and transfer to Massawa. Thence he returned to Cairo and resigned his Sudan appointment. He was exhausted by years of incessant work. In March 1880, he recovered for a couple of weeks in the Hôtel du Forçon in Lausanne, 3 Rue Saint-Pierre. Famous for its views on Lake Geneva and because several celebrities had stayed there, such as Giuseppe Garibaldi, one of Gordon's heroes, and possibly one of the reasons Gordon had chosen this hotel. In the hotel's restaurant, now a pub called Happy Days, he met another guest from England, the Reverend R.H. Barnes, vicar of Heavytree near Exeter, who became a good friend. After Gordon's death, Barnes co-authored Charles George Gordon, a sketch which begins with the meeting at the hotel in Lausanne. Other offers. On the 2nd of March 1880, on his way from London to Switzerland, Gordon had visited King Leopold II of Belgium in Brussels and was invited to take charge of the Congo Free State. In April, the government of the Cape Colony offered him the position of Commandant of the Cape Local Forces. In May, the Marquis of Ripon, who had been given the post of Governor-General of India, asked Gordon to go with him as private secretary. Gordon accepted the offer, but shortly after arriving in India, he resigned. Hardly had he resigned when he was invited by Sir Robert Hart, 1st Baronet, Inspector General of Customs in China, to Beijing. He arrived in China in July and met Li Hongzhang, and learned that there was risk of war with Russia. Gordon proceeded to Beijing and used all his influence to ensure peace. Gordon returned to Britain and rented an apartment on 8 Victoria Grove in London. But in April 1881 he left for Mauritius as Commander, Royal Engineers. He remained in Mauritius until March 1882, when he was promoted to Major General. He was sent to the Cape to aid in settling affairs in Basutoland, but he returned to the United Kingdom after only a few months. Being unemployed, Gordon decided to go to Palestine, a region he had long desired to visit, where he would remain for a year. After his visit, Gordon suggested in his book Reflections in Palestine a different location for Golgotha, the site of Christ's crucifixion. The site lies north of the traditional site at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and is now known as the Garden Tomb, or sometimes as Gordon's Calvary. Gordon's interest was prompted by his religious beliefs, as he had become an evangelical Christian in 1854. King Leopold II then asked him again to take charge of the Congo Free State. He accepted and returned to London to make preparations, but soon after his arrival the British requested that he proceed immediately to the Sudan, where the situation had deteriorated badly after his departure. Another revolt had arisen, led by the self-proclaimed Mahdi, Muhammad Ahmed. Mahdi's uprising. The Egyptian forces in the Sudan were insufficient to cope with the rebels, and the northern government was occupied in the suppression of the Yoruba revolt. By September 1882, the Sudanese position had grown perilous. In December 1883, the British government ordered Egypt to abandon the Sudan, but that was difficult to carry out, as it involved the withdrawal of thousands of Egyptian soldiers, civilian employees, and their families. The British government asked Gordon to proceed to Khartoum to report on the best method of carrying out the evacuation. Gordon started for Cairo in January 1884, accompanied by Lt. Col. J.D. H. Stewart. At Cairo, he received further instructions from Sir Evelyn Baring, and was appointed Governor-General with executive powers. Traveling through Coruscant and Berber, he arrived at Khartoum on the 18th of February, where he offered his earlier foe, the slaver King Seber Rama, release from prison in exchange for leading troops against Ahmed. Gordon commenced the task of sending the women and children and the sick and wounded to Egypt, and about 2,500 had been removed before the Mahdi's forces closed in. Gordon hoped to have the influential local leader Seber Rama appointed to take control of Sudan, but the British government refused to support a former slaver. The advance of the rebels against Khartoum was combined with a revolt in the eastern Sudan. Because the Egyptian troops at Suakin were repeatedly defeated, a British force was sent to Suakin under General Sir Gerald Graham, which drove the rebels away in several hard-fought actions. Gordon urged that the road from Suakin to Berber be opened, but his request was refused by the government in London, and in April Graham and his forces were withdrawn and Gordon and the Sudan were abandoned. The garrison at Berber surrendered in May, and Khartoum was completely isolated. Gordon energetically organized the defense of Khartoum. A siege by the Mahdist forces started on the 18th of March 1884. The British had decided to abandon the Sudan, but it was clear that Gordon had other plans, and the public increasingly called for a relief expedition. It was not until August that the government decided to take steps to relieve Gordon, and only by November was the British relief force, called the Nile Expedition, or, more popularly, the Khartoum Relief Expedition or Gordon Relief Expedition, under the command of Field Marshal Garnet Wolseley, ready. The force consisted of two groups, a flying column of camel-borne troops from Wadi Halfa. The troops reached Korti towards the end of December, and arrived at Metemma on the 20th of January 1885. There they found 4 gunboats which had been sent north by Gordon 4 months earlier, and prepared them for the trip back up the Nile. On the 24th of January 2 of the steamers, carrying 20 soldiers of the Sussex Regiment wearing red tunics to clearly identify them as British, were sent on a reconnaissance mission to Khartoum, with orders from Wolseley not to attempt to rescue Gordon or bring him ammunition or food. On arriving at Khartoum on the 28th of January, they found that the city had been captured and Gordon had been killed just 2 days before. Coincidentally, 2 days before his 52nd birthday. Under heavy fire from dervish warriors on the bank, the two steamers turned back upriver. The British press criticised the relief force for arriving 2 days late, but it was later argued that the Mahdi's forces had good intelligence, and if the Camel Corps had advanced earlier, the final attack on Khartoum would also have come earlier. Finally, the boats sent were not there to relieve Gordon, who was not expected to agree to abandon the city, and the small force and limited supplies on board could have offered scant military support for the besieged in any case. Death. The manner of his death is uncertain, but it was romanticized in a popular painting by George William Joy, General Gordon's Last Stand, and again in the film Khartoum with Charlton Heston as Gordon. Gordon was apparently killed at the Governor-General's palace about an hour before dawn, as recounted in Bernard M. Allen's article, How Khartoum Fell. The Mahdi had given strict orders to his 3 caliphs not to kill Gordon. However, the orders were not obeyed. Gordon died on the steps of a stairway in the northwestern corner of the palace, where he and his personal bodyguard, Aga Khalil Orfala, had been firing at the enemy. Orfala was knocked unconscious and did not see Gordon die. When he woke up again that afternoon, he found Gordon's body covered with flies and the head cut off. A merchant, Bourdini Bey, glimpsed Gordon standing on the palace steps in a white uniform looking into the darkness. Reference is made to an 1889 account of the general surrendering his sword to a senior Mahdist officer, then being struck and subsequently speared in the side as he rolled down the staircase. When Gordon's head was unwrapped at the Mahdi's feet, he ordered the head transfixed between the branches of a tree, where all who passed it could look in disdain. Children could throw stones at it and the hawks of the desert could sweep and circle above. His body was desecrated and thrown down a well. After the reconquest of the Sudan, in 1898, several attempts were made to locate Gordon's remains, but in vain. In the hours following Gordon's death, an estimated 10,000 civilians and members of the garrison were killed in Khartoum. The massacre was finally halted by orders of the Mahdi. Many of Gordon's papers were saved and collected by 2 of his sisters, Helen Clark Gordon, who married Gordon's medical colleague in China, Dr. Moffat, and Mary, who married Gerald Henry Blunt. Gordon's papers, as well as some of his grandfather's, were accepted by the British Library around 1937.